Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mutual Aid Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things mutual aid. This show is supported by From the Periphery, a media collective founded by activists, analysts, and media workers to build internationalist dialogues from below and connect struggles from around the world. If you want to support this show and the collective around it, please consider heading over to patreon.com/fromtheperiphery and become a member for as little as $5 a month. Becoming a member not only helps support our work, but also gives you access to exclusive content and early access and a lot of other fun stuff. And so with that said, here's another episode of the Mutual Aid Podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Israa, and I'm here with Ayman and our first guest, Dean Spade. Dean has been pretty monumental in both of our thinking around mutual aid. He's the author of Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity in This Crisis and the Next. And for me, this book has been foundational because it was one of the first attempts at trying to conceptualize mutual aid as a practice rather than just a theory, and specifically trying to focus on the how-to, which is prior to that didn't really exist. And I think it's a really great stepping point for really anyone who's interested, whether they've heard about mutual aid before or not, to start to conceptualize what it means for us to build movements that are based on non-hierarchical systems of care and distribution of power that is both horizontal and as a way to resist our systems of oppression and domination by taking care of each other. Dean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm so excited that you all are making this podcast and so happy to be part of it. I'm Dean. I'm based in the US. I've been in movements stuff for like 25 years, a lot of queer and trans liberation, prison police abolition, border abolition, anti-war, Palestine solidarity type of work. I used to be a poverty lawyer, and I spend a lot of my time these days like supporting different kinds of mutual aid groups and some other like kind of chapter-based groups and small local groups that are just trying to like figure out how to do the work and keep it going and deal with like the common obstacles that come up and how to do decision making together and build a group culture that can sustain and bring in new people and all those like kind of hard things. So I spend a lot of my time doing the kind of work that the mutual aid book is speaking to, especially like the second half of it. And for people who are interested in that, I've put a lot of those workshops online so people can do like watch them and then do them themselves with their groups on my website, deanspade.net. And I have a new book coming out that kind of takes the next part of that conversation about like how we relate to each other. It's like a self-help book that has a lot of stuff about sex, love, romance, and friendship that are things that kind of tend to get in the way in a lot of our group work. It's called Love in a Fucked Up World, and it's coming out in January.
Yeah, I'm really excited to read that book. Dean, I'm wondering if you could just start us off with defining for us, for you and your practices, what does mutual aid mean?
Yeah. For me, it is one of those words that's just used like to mean all kinds of things. So, people just say it to mean all kinds of things. To me, mutual aid is, the part of like the ecosystem of all of our social movement work. It's the part of that work that's about directly supporting each other for basic survival needs. Mm-hmm. And something is only mutual aid work to me if it's based in a shared understanding that people in crisis are not to blame for the crisis they're in, but instead like the systems that put them in that crisis. Like that's what makes it mutual aid work and not charity work, is that it doesn't blame people for being unhoused or whatever situation they're going through, but instead it blames like the system that produces, capitalist, racist housing market. And it's only mutual aid for me if it includes an invitation to collective action. So it's like, because we believe the problem isn't the person, we think the problem is the system. It also is like, hey, if you want to join us, we actually believe in attacking the system. So you can come sit here at the, at the table where we're giving out water if you want to. If you're receiving the water, would you like to be part of the group? Or would you like to come with us, to go protest at this landlord's house next weekend? Or would you like, just that it, and you don't have to join us to be part of, to get the water or the tent or whatever we're, giving out, or the babysitting or whatever. But it's because it's based on a theory about destroying the systems that are hurting us and helping each other survive. It includes like, please join us in that work. So those are the kind of the elements that I think of that make it mutual aid. And, the big piece of that is distinguishing it from charity, because in our contexts, and I'm specifically thinking about my experiences of like how poverty is addressed in the United States, but I think it also has, roots in lots and lots of places around the world. And this model comes from like a Christian European model that we have in the United States. The the model is wherever people are like sort of giving something out to the poor or people in crisis, it comes with a lot of strings attached. It's very blaming. It's like, what's wrong with you? Why are you unhoused? You can't get on the housing waiting list until you show that you're sober, until you take these psych meds, or it's only for people with children, or people without children, no undocumented people, all this kind of distinguishing who is the deserving poor from the undeserving poor. And this is all based in an idea that the system itself is fair, and that like the kind of rich people or government will give these little crumbs to a few people who are in crisis, but it's very system sustaining. It's not like, oh, we don't want to have a system in which some people are rich and some people are poor. It's not like, oh, let's just give something to the few poor people who deserve it, who are special, who are children, or who are women, or whatever is being, who are properly Christian or properly sober. And so mutual aid upends all of that. And it's like, oh no, everything for everyone right now. The system is horrible and we should destroy it and build a world in which everyone has everything they need. And so that's kind of the really distinguishing principle of mutual aid from charity that I think is really essential. When people are doing mutual aid work, we're always asking ourselves, how are charity models sneaking in here? Because that charity mentality is so profound. It's a white supremacist, colonial, Christian mentality that's very pervasive. And so we're always asking ourselves, like I've seen a lot of groups want to do mutual aid, but then they'll be like, but no drug users, like this stuff creeps in, right? So we're always asking like, are there ways in which we're accidentally, and we're imperfect people doing imperfect work. So that's an ongoing inquiry. It's not something that we can like resolve. It's just like, oh yeah, that will happen, and can we just have like a attention to it together?
No, that's why I really appreciated your book when it came out. Interestingly enough, only a few months prior, I had been doing research on mutual aid and found very little around the word mutual aid. This was a few months into the October 17 revolution in Lebanon, and I'd been seeing mutual aid happening. And as someone who just has an interest in sort of anarchist organizing and the like, I could find very little. And so it was very funny that only after I wrote the article, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, then your book came out and essentially gave form to a lot of these things in a kind of concrete way, which I really appreciated. And the three main members of the mutual aid group I'm a part of, Queer Mutual Aid Lebanon, we all read the book and we discussed it. And I'm very excited to talk more about it because those things of that, like how the charity model and the charity mentality creeps into the work is huge, and it's very difficult, and it's not always so clear cut. Like, because we do live in this like hegemonic, or rather where the charity model is hegemonic, and that in most grassroots leftist organizing is kind of an exclusive, like as in they never meet, which is what we wanted to do, is combine the two, because that is what mutual aid is. Kind of combining the means and ends. But inevitably we found ourselves eventually, in the last 4 years, facing situations of like criteria, facing situations of not about deserving, undeserving, but if there's someone we've supported. This is the sort of minutia that I'd love to get into eventually in this conversation, because the book is very important as a kind of basic guideline.
Right.
Because, and the term itself was only becoming like resurgent. There was a resurgence of it during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, I just sort of wanted to say I appreciate it, and but also that it is important and situated within this kind of atmosphere wherein, I don't know, we can't name the thing, or that, I mean, I remember going to this like very baby anarchist meeting during the October 17 uprisings, and them telling me that like, no, we don't do that stuff, we don't do charity, and I'm like, it's not really, how do you not, or then, and you brought up something very interesting I found, I'm sorry to get too distracted, too digressive, or whatever, but one of them said, yeah, how about we give out sandwiches, but before we give them the sandwich, they have to listen to our like politics. I was like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, if they want to listen, ahla wa sahla, for sure, but that is charity. Like, here's
that's
a
a
sandwich.
complicated one. I've had some mutual aid groups that have been like, actually err on the other side in the US, especially like in 2020, 2021, when a lot of new people were doing mutual aid. I had these interesting conversations with people who were doing, especially like mutual aid at like huge encampments of unhoused people in big cities. And a lot of times people doing the mutual aid project were not unhoused or even recently or had ever been unhoused. And so there's big class differences and just, so they're kind of aware of that, which was really great, and trying to really be like, what does this all mean? And they were like, is it weird for us to put like a big banner that says housing for all on our table? Is it weird for us to bring our politics? And I was like, no, as long as you don't say you can't have the water or the tent, right? Because it's like, we don't want people to defang mutual aid so much for fear of proselytizing politics. So this tension is really juicy. And we also, of course, like we want, because of course what they were experiencing is they're like, oh, we're sitting at the table, letting people charge their phones or giving out water or whatever. And some people are, of course, like wildly right wing. They're unhoused, but they're like, still not politically aligned with us, or they're a mixed bag, like they're kind of right on and then also kind of racist or kind of transphobic or something. And I was like, yeah, like this is like the nature of doing the work, is like we all show up there together at the crisis and then we try to influence each other. Like it's okay to try to influence each other politically. It's better if you don't say like you can't have the soup unless you listen to this, but also like, it's autonomous. If that's what you want to do, like it's to me, I agree with you that it kind of edges into some of the like religious charity stuff that feels that way. But also like I think it's like I want people to be a little bit bold about their politics if they're willing to. But what you said too also, I meant about the word mutual aid, I do think we should talk about that. Like lots and lots of people do mutual aid, don't call it that. This term is just one term. It did have a resurgence during 2020. It was popular in the United States 100 years ago, and before that, actually way back into the 1800s, as mutual aid societies. But like lots of like probably the most famous mutual aid in the US history is the Black Panther Party's programs, which they called survival programs. Same theory, like meet the community where they're give people what they want, politicized environment. But the term mutual aid is not not necessary to identify it. For me, using that term was because I was interested in using the anarchist term. I'm influenced by an anarchist theory of mutual aid, but not exclusively. I'm also very influenced by, Black radical tradition mutual aid and feminist mutual aid and migrant mutual aid in the US and so many other things. But that term, I think has been to some degree was associated with anarchism more. I think post 2020, that term just kind of it's a little bit watered down in the US context, at least, and means lots of things to lots of people.
Yeah, something that Ayman and I have been talking about is like I'm Egyptian, Ayman is Lebanese. And so if we talk to our parents or we talk to people from our community about mutual aid, they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? But if we look at our just day-to-day practices of how our communities take care of each other, for us, it's like, oh yeah, this is the mutual aid. So our way of defining to people in our communities becomes pinpointing the practices that we already engage in that are examples of mutual aid, right? The added politics piece is like something I think about a lot, because it's like in your book, one of your defining aspects of mutual aid is that it's not only just taking care of each other, but there's the political arm of this. And so like my parents, I'll talk about like, they'll talk about taking care of community, doing like kitchen for iftar during Ramadan, things like that. But they'll adamantly assert that this is not political, right? And in theory, it's not. It's a religious practice. And also you're like, right, you're doing this because if you don't do this, they're fasting and they're not breaking their fast, right? They don't have anything to actually sustain them. Yeah. And so like that is definitely a tension that I keep coming back to, is like, how do you bring in the education piece while also doing the work? And then also not become this like pushing down your ideas. So it is really this fine balance of doing it, practicing the politics as you do it, and naming the politics that's at play, and then trying to bring attention to it. And that's something I've been really trying to play with in my mutual aid work in Gaza, working with people on the ground in Gaza, engaging in it. At first, like when I connect with them, it's like, oh, we need to do aid work. Do we need to do this? And it's like, yeah, this is aid work, but this is our form of resistance. This is in a time and a space where Palestinian life, specifically in Gaza, is being targeted and demonized and killed. Us doing this is protecting life, and we're doing it because of the politics. And so like that became like this ongoing theme in how we engage with social media and how we put out our work, is like, this is our resistance work. This is how we do resistance, is through protecting life and trying to offer and support little things that are about sustaining life, whether it's community kitchens, clean water, baby formula, just these little tiny things that aid work, but there's no other charity on the ground doing this, or that now that there are, they left, right? Because it's too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And so we continue to choose. And then even the people who are based outside of Gaza, and Gaza is a really interesting case because you've had this flooding. Last time we saw this was right in COVID, this flooding of grassroots efforts of people trying to do something to help, but not knowing how, and then seeing this like little, like smaller initiatives on the ground of anyone trying to do anything. My main partner, a Ghazawi male, 24-year-old male in Gaza, he talks about it. He's like, I'm doing what my parents taught me. You know, my parents were martyred last November, along with 40 other members of his family in a targeted strike. And so he's like, I channel my grief by doing the thing that my father taught me to do, which is take care of the community. That, right, that's for us sitting here, like, yeah, that's mutual aid. You're resisting the destruction of life by taking care, and that's rooted in your practices as you were raised within your family dynamics, right? And so, yeah, it's been this like interesting trying to meddle, right? Like make it political when people are trying to tell me, especially at a time and like, right, oh, we're not political. We just do humanity. No, this is political. Yeah.
And maybe all aid is political. Like maybe all, like,
Absolutely,
because like I think on a global scale, we can really, really, really see how like the quote unquote humanitarian aid of imperialist countries is always really politically targeted. It often is like a very thin shield of a imperialist warfare strategy. It's, you know, we know that, and we know like a long-term history of, you know, things like the US doing, you know, aid for HIV/AIDS with a, you know, gag rule, and, you know, like the, you know, kind of anti-abortion stuff in the US aid. I mean, just, you know, it's really horrifying. And so it makes sense that people are suspicious of the political agendas and might even want to say words like it's not political, but it's actually wildly political who is living and dying on Earth. And like, and what you're saying, like just like doing anything to support Palestinian survival is an extremely bold and vitally important, very political act right now. And it's, I think sometimes the word political can also be confusing because people think it means it's associated with a political party or a government.
Right.
So we're talking about an autonomous, like we're talking about an autonomous politics, a politics of doing something despite and away from and separate from and at odds with nonprofits and governments. And that's, you know, NGOs and governments. And that's all really complex. And I think maybe also like in some contexts, people might be like, our food project's not political, meaning you don't have to be part of a political party to come get it. Like there's a lot of like, the word political is just pretty amorphous. And so it's like how to talk about that in each setting that we might be in, where like what that means to your parents to say this food project is not political might be different than what you mean if you were to hear someone, you know, like just because of the projects you're interested in, the genealogies of resistance you're speaking to in your lifetime that's somewhat different generationally, or the context you're reading in or collaborating across. I think that can be confusing. And I think this is why, you know, for me, various anarchist and anti-state traditions are important helpers for me to understand. Like I didn't come to this politics through that, to be honest. Like I didn't study anarchism. I came to my politics through like women of color, feminist abolitionism in the US. Like those trajectories are how I learned to like be suspicious of institutions and hate state violence and hate, you know, governments and stuff. But when as I developed that politics more and started learning about anarchism, lots of different kinds of anarchism, I was like, oh, this has a theory about this kind of autonomy that that I'm learning about through other trajectories, but is actually, you know, it's useful just to find lots of different ways of reading and thinking about that. Like, what is it we mean by autonomous, you know, groups working on things and not centralizing authority and not using coercion? Like, what does it mean to be like, yes, I want you to hear about my politics, and there's no way I can force you to, and I'm not trying to, and I don't believe in that. That's like, you know, a very different mode than a politics of the US dropping packages on Afghanistan. It's just really different, you know?
Yeah. Personally, I've been defining politics as a reflection of my ethics and morals, and it's the way I manifest the ideals. And so how I engage with people, how I engage with the world around me is very much my politics. And so mutual aid becomes an extension of that, right? I want to be taken care of as much as I want anyone else to be taken care of. And so mutual aid becomes this practice of how do we take care of each other separate from relying on the state, separate from relying on this top of like authority that tells us how we should live, how we should be, and what it means to be secure and safe in this world. So I'm curious, like for you, how is mutual aid a reflection of your politics?
I love this question. I think that my life is dedicated to liberation,
Mm-hmm.
and that means a lot of different things. And one of the things it means is the main thing that liberation means to me is like as much as possible being with and responding to reality instead of being under a bunch of like delusions and spells given to me by like society or emotional reactions I'm having or norms I was raised in. So I'm trying to
Mm,
be responsive to actual conditions and do whatever I can while I'm alive to like reduce suffering and like cultivate liberation, which for me, liberation is like also like us, everyone having everything they need and like having as
mm-hmm.
little coercion as possible in their lives and also having collective stewardship. So it's not totally individual. It's like we might have shared norms about, not sexually assaulting each other or whatever, making sure everyone has a place to sleep. Those norms are guiding us, right? And us coming up with and refining those norms all the time, all together and debating them. And so for me, mutual aid is like about us right now doing what we need to reduce suffering instead of waiting for elites to do it. Like I think the biggest delusion we all live under is the idea of the state and the idea of the state as a caretaker and the idea that we are all dangerous and bad and need to be governed and controlled and policed by governments and can't help each other and ourselves, have to like beg them, vote for them, wait for them, ask them, convince
Mm-hmm.
them. And of course, they're not going to be convinced to do something that is outside of their nature. And the reason states exist is to extract, concentrate wealth and decision-making power and dominate. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, mutual aid is like, we're living in extremely, extremely dangerous times that I think are a threat to the existence of, I think that, the consumer industrial society is already in collapse. And so,
Yeah.
so many people are experiencing such heightened suffering, and that is actually just going to increase for the rest of my life. Like mutual aid is just like a way of talking about us all thinking we can do something about that right now and not wait and
Yeah.
respond based in reality instead of being lost in a delusion that maybe someday some elites will take care of us. And so it feels inevitable. And for me, I was, as soon as I got, I think all social movement work, mutual aid is central to all social movement work. It's incredibly common. I first got involved in queer and trans organizing and doing a lot of support work around people with HIV living in New York City and being unhoused and trying to get through the city's shelter program and all of that stuff. We were just doing that with people. We were just accompanying people to those offices and doing protests at those offices and trying to get people what they need. Like I didn't have a word for that. It's just like, that's what you do. If you're an activist, you
Hmm.
do immediate work to help people with what they're going through, supporting people who are in jail and prison right now, while you're also trying to, of course, like destroy the prison system. Like those two things, like they're inseparable. Like, of course,
Yeah.
you are doing this because you care about those people and you know those people, and also they're the ones who know what's going on in there. So if you're going to have a good strategy from the outside, you got to get all the information from the people on the inside about what the system is really like and how it's working today, and are they giving people their meds or not, and when are people getting released and whatever. And so I didn't have any kind of theory of mutual aid. I was just in movements. Movements just happen. I mean, the book Mutual Aid is not any of my ideas. It's just me writing
Yeah.
down how everybody knows it works, who does it, and trying to
Yeah.
make that really easy for people to read. Who are I wrote that book not because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but because of the Trump election, the 2016
Mm,
Trump election. He was elected. And there was suddenly all these people who were like newly angry and pissed, just like there are right now from his
mm-hmm.
reelection. And what I saw was all these like nonprofits like ACLU and Planned Parenthood and stuff, like really misdirecting people and being like, we're going to sue him, donate to us and we'll sue and we'll block Trump and all this stuff that's
Right.
about elites rescuing you. That also just, by the way, doesn't work. And I was like, there's all these new
Mm-hmm.
people who are pissed and scared for the first time. We should be recruiting them to actually do something in their communities that helps people right now who they're scared for, like immigrants or unhoused people or queer people or whoever they're feeling scared about, who Trump is targeting. And instead, people are being sent to back into the illusion that like,
Yeah.
elites will save us. And so I was at that moment, I was just like, I made this website called Big Door Brigade. And I was, I wrote an essay about me. I was just like, I was also just feeling the frustration of how like even in universities, people teach a lot of classes on social movements. They never include mutual aid. It's like they
Yeah.
just teach about like what famous speeches men gave and what important marches happened and what legislation changed and the big
Hmm.
rally. And it's like the actual work, which is mostly done by women, mostly women of color in the U.S. context. It's just not taught. And I just was like, this is so irritating. And so I was kind of just on like is there any way that I can produce some things that'll help people who are newly mobilizing, like know that this is actually where the goods are, and this is how most people get involved in lifelong movement work is because they start through joining a mutual aid project of some kind or some kind of effort like that. That's what ropes people in because people are driven to want to help right now, which is like so beautiful.
Hmm.
But instead, they get told to like go click on something on the ACLU website. So anyway,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I don't even know how I got here, but that desire to move us from that disempowerment is, I think,
Yeah.
central to politics and to make ideas easier for people to understand. I love reading really dense stuff too, and I think all forms of writing are beautiful. I just think in this lifetime, I'm interested in reaching new people and people who don't, who may not want to read the more complicated stuff. And so I feel like a lot of my work is no new ideas, just like translating stuff out into a package that I hope people will pick up, make a lot of videos, things like that. And a lot of it nobody picks up. It's just you just try stuff and you have your little one lifetime and try it out.
Yeah. No, I think like this breaking of the illusion, right, and retaking power, um, has been very interesting, and also like the moving away from the nonprofit industrial complex. Like that's been one of my primary like right. I grew up in a very apolitical home, and so like the way of engaging with help or engaging with society and helping quote unquote make it into a better place was through the nonprofit industrial complex. And I remember in 2016, I was in Greece, in Lesbos, Greece, doing migrant work for people
Oh,
coming from, really at that point, it was from Turkey, right? Because that was the closest point to Europe. And so this is at the peak of the sinkings and the drownings. Um, and the thing that really, really shook me was talking. I was in a small village of 100 people, and each one of those people could root their existence in that village to their family at some generation back, migrating to that place because of war and because of something in their homeland. And the way they talked about it is, and it was the fishermen, like fishing was the primary way of sustaining life there. And so when I started talking to the locals, the way they described it to me was, um, oh, we went out fishing and we couldn't fish because of the bodies in the water and the boats. And there was no one around. There was no governments, there was no organizations, there was nothing. And so we had no choice but to do something because it was one, preventing us from our own livelihood, but two, we saw in them what our family was. We saw like our family had made that same path. And so we started to use our boats to help people reach the shore safely. We tried to do what we can to make sure that people who are drowning, one, try don't drown, and two, those who have drowned are at least given a uh, an honorable end, instead of just being lost in this massive grave. And then they added, and then we took them home with us, and we gave them our food, and we gave them our clothing, and we tried to offer something
mm,
until they could figure out a path forward. And this is at a time also, so I'm there working with nonprofits. UN is down there. I'm listening to the locals. The locals were still continuing to do that even when organizations and the militarization was increasing. Um, and I'm watching how the nonprofit organizations were fighting over resources, but not in a good way, like well, we can't give everyone who arrives things because we have to think about the next boat, right? So like denying people right in front of you because this imaginary like in the future thing, right? Or fighting with each other. So the ego plays and the power plays, and that fundamentally broke how I was viewing the world.
yeah.
And it really and I think a lot is like to the villagers because they really taught me like we did what we needed to do because we had no choice. And that's how they talked about it. It's like, what else are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
Not only can we not do our own livelihood, but like, are we just supposed to ignore people who look like us, act like we could see ourselves in them?
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's so beautiful, especially the part around people giving each other dignity in death and the need for that and the I'm Jewish and there's a long-standing Jewish tradition of burial societies
Mm,
and people um yeah, caring for each other during death and, has to help, having that's all volunteer based. And they still exist in many Jewish communities, volunteer based burial societies. And some in the US, there's some people I know who do this specifically for Jews who can't be part of any congregation that would have it. Because they're like,
mm,
for most of us, if we're anti-Zionist, we can't really join a Jewish congregation. And so,
yeah,
or for some people being queer and trans, things like that. And so there's whole burial societies, they're all volunteer based that treat your body in this caring way when you
yeah,
die who can't access this through other parts of Jewish community. I'm just very moved by that is such a profound kind of mutual aid, and that we just the idea of just caring for each other like from before we're born until after we're dead. So
yeah.
anyway, thank you for sharing that experience.
No, thank you for sharing what you're sharing. Like I mean, that's the like mutually, the more I think about it, it's like these little, it's the care work, right? Like mentioned that multiple times, these little things that we ignore and we wash over, just like we do in our capitalist society, right? Like the caring of life, the caring of the home, the caring of the things that actually sustain the capitalist exploitation that we're all under.
Yeah, it's like what life is actually made out of. Yeah, like instead,
Literally.
like they want you to think it's made out of
Yeah.
like keep like executives doing things and like politicians, and life is made of like you driving the bus and me mopping the floors and I'm in changing the diaper of the baby and somebody bringing the old person to their appointment. Like it's and that's also I think our dream is that everybody would just be like, oh, capital and money are all actually a big fiction. Let's just give each other all this stuff for free. Let's just give each
Mm-hmm.
other all the medicine and all the childcare. And like we just don't even we're already the ones doing it. That other thing is
Mm-hmm.
fabricated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think
Mm.
that's one of the things our movements are falling like defaulting to, right? Like the big R revolution, we're gonna wait for it's the like fighting, it's this, but it's like actually it's the little R, it's the day to day, it's how we treat each other, it's how we hold space, it's how we take care of like who's cooking and who's cleaning and who's nursing, like for those who are sick. Um, and I think mutual aid for me really captures all that in a very wide scope, you know?
I've got a lot. I mean, yeah, thank you both of you actually. This is just fascinating. I feel very privileged just being here with both of you. Um, I think in my research of mutual aid, just like used as the term, one of the earliest examples I saw was mutual aid societies in the US in like the mid 19th century, and it was mostly around burial, specifically for like
Mm,
African Americans. Because again, there was like a neglect of, okay, well, this, he died, whatever. But like, no, let's gather the funds to give this person or whatever a dignified burial. And it's kind of reminding me a few months ago, a trans woman in Lebanon was found murdered, and it was the kind of thing that the state obviously doesn't even recognize
mm,
this person exists. I think they were
mm,
also Syrian, so they
Yeah.
doubly don't exist in Lebanon, like without documentation. And so that was something that not only we as a group saw, but because we were talking to people who were close to her, who they were immediately, that was their thing. And we supported that with them. And some of our members attended the funeral. And what was very interesting is that, I mean, God, I've got so many thoughts. This whole thing about life, this whole thing about getting into this work with an emphasis of sustaining life and care, but then also through the work, constantly rediscovering the importance, the centrality. Like me and Isra have definitely talked about this, that this work constantly reinforces our understanding of life, of the world, of like what do we want to do here with this one life we have. Um, and the whole, yeah, reducing suffering of those around us, especially those oppressed under these systems of domination. But all the other bullshit just ceases to matter to me
Yeah, what
that
else would you do
much.
with your life? Like what? Like
Yeah.
what else is there? Like buying something? Like it's not going to
Yeah, yeah.
satisfy.
Right.
But so what I want to connect that with also what was really interesting is a lot of the eulogies that happened at this funeral were targeted against
Mhm.
the NGOs who were like, okay, I see some of you here now today. Where the
Yeah.
fuck were you
Yeah.
when this person needed you? Where were you when this person wasn't able to get housing? Where were you and whatever? And there is that political understanding. There is also that mutual aid understanding of we need to take care of our own because even in death, like they're not, no one's going to come bury us. Like we need to bury our own, and it's terrifying. But what I want to connect this back to is just a sort of thread that I've noticed in this conversation is the aspect of mutual aid and care work that is totally erased in our even historical readings of social movements and presently in the social movements that
Mhm.
exist today. And I think queerness is such an important aspect of this because queers are generally erased. Like when you look back at any of these historical movements or revolutions, they're seen as completely peripheral,
Yeah.
um, and erased functionally. And obviously, a lot of reasons for visibility and ability to just be whatever. But a lot of the work we know must have was happening, necessity like necessarily was happening. But so with queer mutual aid, what I've been thinking about is like looking back into the history of our region and how did people
Mhm.
take care of each other, and then trying to do some of that work of like reimagining those erased queer histories. How did queer folk take care of each other? How did queer folk survive, or and even experience joy? You know, it's not written. There's very little oral history that this does exist. But yeah, it's like it's sort of constantly doing that work to then be able to influence our work. And like Isra was saying at the beginning, they didn't use the word mutual aid. In Arabic, we have a double problem, which is that like the translation, no one knows what
Mhm.
it's not used of mutual aid, but there's sort of practices that do
Mhm.
exist,
Yeah.
obviously. I mean, we talked a bit about Kropotkin in one of the earlier episodes, and the whole point is that it's always existed, not just with humans, with all organisms. Like it's a
Mhm.
necessity for life. It's a
Mhm.
factor of evolution. And in the same way, it's a factor of revolution. It's not the factor, but it's there, but it's erased. And so, yeah, I definitely saw in your book that you were just
Mhm.
naming these things. What I would like to, I'd be very curious to hear is how you, I mean, this is 4 years ago, but how was the
Mhm.
reception of the book? And how has like your view of like mutual aid as it exists at the moment, has it changed? Have you seen new
Mhm.
things that have like, if you were to write the book today, that'd be like, ah, look at
Mhm.
this and that, or
Yeah, I have several things to that. First, I just want to say too, what you're saying about queers like needing each other to survive and having to engage in mutual aid. Like, I think that I hear that a lot talking to lots of people. Like, the histories in the U.S. of like Black people being totally excluded from like every other form of support and having to build autonomous support systems for burial, for ensuring each other's homes, for meeting people who are coming through, who are escaped slaves, and helping them hide and find a way to survive. Queers, immigrants, like who are showing up on the shores of a new continent and being like not knowing the language, and other immigrants from their communities had to help them survive. Like the things that everyone needs to know about mutual aid right now on Earth, because like everywhere you live, there's like a storm or a fire or a flood coming, and the government doesn't give a
Mhm.
fuck. And everywhere like everyone is in so much danger right now. But the wisdom about how to do mutual aid already exists inside all the communities of people who've been cut off from family, cut off from state, cut off from church, wherever it was people got things done, for who were included, right? So it's just it's useful. And I've also had that experience, a huge part of my life, for at least 25 years. I've been part of 25 years for part of trans communities, and so much people trying to raise money for funerals, and like trying to have, yeah, just really it is, yeah, very profound.
but I just
Yeah.
actually, because you mentioned it, and that's really important. I think the main thing that people think fall back on, which is
Right.
non-state, is the
Yeah.
family as a form
Yeah.
of economic support. But then it's even more complicated
Yeah.
for queer folk, wherein a lot of the times excluded
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
from
So
The
so
family
true.
support
Yeah,
system.
I'm so glad you
I
said
just
that. And
wanted to
that
mention
has
him.
definitely been what I've seen. Um, yeah, the book, one of the things that surprised me about when mutual aid came out was its popularity in other countries. Because I was like, oh, this is like a 101 for Americans. Like, my examples are very US centric, not exclusively, but I was really thinking about my context. And honestly, I think people in the US are just like less politically sophisticated than everyone else in the world because we're forced to think that there's not really a world at all beyond us. And obviously, I'm not speaking for every single person in the United States, but just like the vibe, the general culture.
Yes.
So I was very surprised that it would be interesting to anybody anywhere else. Um, and it was translated to all these, languages, like
Mm.
Korean and in Italian and Catalan and Spanish and um, German, and I mean, like lots of
Wow.
languages and Portuguese. I just was like, really? Like I think of those places and people as really kind of having more of a handle on this. But so that was really interesting. And part of it, people said that even that their movements didn't have handbook style writing about it. Like that some places people told me, yeah, people in our movements read a lot more theoretical stuff, and there's not as much of this handbook style is kind of American and kind of like useful. So that was really interesting, surprising. Um, some of the things I've observed, so the 2020 initial COVID moment, a lot of people got involved in neighborhood mutual aid projects in ways that I've never seen before in my lifetime in the US. And tons and tons of just like new people, which is so cool and also really hard. Like
Mm.
it'd be a group of people, none of whom have ever done any organizing before. So they're really like learning from each other, but without many people who are more experienced in the group or anything like that. So just people running into classic problems. Two people started, they're kind of bossing everyone around and they're having a hard time actually letting other people into decision making, or people struggling to have retention because people were like overextending so far and burning themselves out, not thinking about the long haul. Or also, I saw a lot of groups. One of the things that's kind of relates to something you said earlier in the interview, I'm on about like groups trying to figure out like, okay, we've raised this much money, but like there's more asks than we could possibly give it to. So like I saw groups, there's a lot of groups that got created during that time that just raised money online and gave the money away online. So there wasn't a lot of in-person relationships.
Mm.
And they're like, how do we tell if someone's real who's asking for the money, which is a real thing?
Yeah.
And because there's lack of relationships, and also things like groups that there was like some groups that were like regional, like we're doing this just for this our city or our county or whatever. And we've raised, we're finding that we're raising, $2,000 a month and we're giving it away, but there's some people who need a $20,000 like new trailer home, or need like repairs to something that's $30,000, or need like a wheelchair that like the state won't give them. That's this, like these. And what do you do? And a lot of those groups, if it was middle class people raising the money, they were thinking, oh, someone might need help with their rent once or whatever. And it's like, actually, and everybody I know who's poor is poor every month.
Yeah.
And it doesn't like there's not like a solution coming. Like they're not going to suddenly become employable, if they're disabled and aren't, and or they're not going to suddenly have the benefits that are available are so low you can't possibly pay rent and food. So like that's not going to change. And these groups weren't ready to take on permanently supporting people. And what this tells us is just that what we already know is like there's not enough people doing this work.
Yeah.
And also, the work can't just be about handing out money because our opponents have all the money. And like
Yeah.
we just don't have enough of it to do the like they literally extract from everyone on earth and leave people without enough. So even if I mean I think people should give away money. I think money projects matter and we should give away money, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
Like we got to figure out, like, people have to also be willing to do harder stuff, like let someone sleep on your couch or actually take care of someone's kids for a while, or like the kind of more intense relational stuff. But a lot of people feel most comfortable just clicking and giving money online because we're pretty isolated. A lot of us are pretty socially scared of each other. We don't feel like we have the skills to share space with somebody, like what we really need is like a lot of people to let people stay in their spare room if they have one, or like, you know what I mean? Like we
Mhm.
like really like housing is like kind of most people I think who die of poverty in the United States, housing could have saved their life. And most people who
Yeah.
die of transphobia, housing could have saved their life. And most
Yeah.
people who die of racism, housing could have saved their life. So that kind of stuff. So I ended up working with a lot of groups that were just struggling with those pieces. And ultimately, it's like there's nothing wrong with those projects. Do them, and also do some stuff that's got some in-person features. And also some of those groups, if they were existing for a long time, I was like, well, can your group of coordinators, can you all at least have more relationships with each other? Can you at least
Mm.
be getting the political benefits of like talking to each other about your ideas? Because there's a part of what I think happens when we do mutual aid work is like, you and I both volunteer to sit at the charging station for unhoused people at the encampment. And then we're sitting there and we just like start to have a conversation about like why we're doing this. And then you tell me all about your history of anarchist thought. And I'm like, what the fuck is anarchism? And I tell you all about abolitionism. And you're like, oh, really? You don't think we need the police? And like, that's beautiful. Like a lot of political ed and mutual development happens through that. And when people are only doing online transactions, they might miss. And the other thing that might happen is like, you may be really different from me, but you may end up like visiting me in the hospital. Like we actually like end up like forming support systems that most people, at least in my context, are missing. People are so isolated. So we want the relational benefits of mutual aid organizing to happen. And I think they don't happen as much when it's just money. And then you are going to get into the problem. Like one thing I'm happy about is that most mutual aid groups, their criteria problems are the good criteria problem. Like we want to give this to the person who has the most need. Good, that's good. That's opposed to charity. You want to give it to the person who's the most moral or who fits our idea of a good person. So that's a better problem, but it's still a problem because all the needs are really severe and there's just not enough money for the things that people need. It's really expensive to live and especially to be housed at this point. So that's a lot of what I've seen. And I've seen people like, one of the, I think, misunderstandings that bugs me a lot is people will be like, it's so fucked up that this group of middle-class people is doing this mutual aid project, that's benefiting poor people. And I'm like, you know what? That's actually okay. Like right now we can't, like, it's like the kind of thing like this group isn't okay unless it's all run by people who are currently in the situation. Well, like a lot of people who are currently unhoused don't have a lot of capacity to organize because they're being like murdered by these conditions. Or people who are currently in a psychiatric crisis or people are currently in jails and prisons have different capacities to organize because they're locked in a cage. It's okay if people who are not in the same vulnerability are doing a lot of things to support that. If they're, of course, we want to do that with a lot of thoughtfulness and wisdom. Like, how can we make sure that the decision making is influenced by people who are experiencing the crisis more? And what's all the ways, like, instead of being like, we're having all of our meetings on Zoom, can we also once a week, ask people who come to the charging table, what do you think about this? We're thinking about this. And how do we informally make all those, how can we individually call people in jail and prison and get their read on our strategy, even though they can't come to our meetings because they're locked in a cage and they don't have Zoom? Like, how can we be rigorous about like deep connection and consultation and also be like, yeah, it's imperfect because we are doing impossible things under impossible conditions. And so I worry that people kind of do that, like, oh my God, we're not doing it perfectly. Maybe we shouldn't do it. And that is unethical to me. Like that becomes about protecting my ego from being wrong or being called out. I'm so afraid of my reputation for doing this imperfectly, or I'm so afraid of that it's so much better to do it imperfectly and learn and grow and be curious and humble than to not do the work to reduce suffering and save lives. Like, you know what I mean? It's just, that feels like a really, yes, let's be critical the whole time. Let's talk about what we can improve. And let's also be like somewhat gentle and loving about that. I think in a lot of groups, it becomes like, if the three of us are in a group, it becomes like, I'm stressed out about us being charity-ish in some way. And then I'm going to blame one of you. And we're going to take these polar positions about some important issue in the work. So instead of us having a collaborative conversation about whether there's some tendencies and what we can do about them, and also at the same time, care for our capacity and all the things we're balancing, it becomes a fight between us, where I'm like, if the group chooses to do the tabling on Thursday, it's because you don't care about trans people. And you're like, but Thursdays are when we do the disability justice thing and you don't care about people with disabilities. And now we're like falling apart instead of just like, oh, wow, we're doing something really hard that we couldn't possibly do perfectly. How are we going to balance that and stick together? And like, at the end of the day, continue our relationships, because thank God I found some other people who want to do this with me, So that's some of the stuff I've been seeing, since, and a lot of those groups, a lot of mutual aid groups have, of course, close, like a lot of things come and go. I think that's okay. I haven't seen any like deeper studies of whether groups, like how many groups lasted, what changed. I mean, that I would love to see somebody do a very deep study, of a particular city or 3 cities or something, and really be like, what happened to these groups? How big did they get their biggest? What did they fall apart over if they fell apart? What are people doing now? My experience with like an Occupy moment in the US and is that oftentimes what happens is a lot of people do something in those big moments, and then some set become lifelong organizers, but most people don't. And one of my questions is, how do we and I think in general, and this is just anecdotal, but I feel like the general like profile of US organizing is that most people who identify as political do one thing when they're young, and then they have like a bad conflict in the group, and they never do anything again, but they forever
Yeah.
might like write about it and be very politicized about it,
Yeah.
but they and like a very have and it have it be part of their reputation, but they don't ever actually organize ever again. And that's often because they were really wounded by like conflict, burnout, things like that that are
Mm-hmm.
not that are unresolved. So one of my questions is, how do we create groups and spaces where people enter and are like, yeah, even if something hard happens, I'm going to stick around. This is where my friends are. This is where my lovers are. This is where I get my emotional and like community needs met. Like I'm gonna stick around, and part of that I think is about learning how to resolve conflict better. Like
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of people just are burned. They're like, I worked so hard and then people were mad at me, and I couldn't handle being criticized because we're all very fragile and want to be perfect because we live in a capitalist, racist society, and so that I'm quite concerned about. Like, how do we have more retention?
You said all the things. So, okay. One thing that's definitely been huge for me in this mutual aid group, first of all, I say this as a bit of a joke, but it's true. I think, the biggest successes of Queer Mutual Aid Lebanon is that we still exist. It's been 4 years. And as a grassroots feminist group in Lebanon, anywhere, it's huge. And I think a part of that is that there's this very concerted effort of doing like mutual aid amongst each other. Like as the organizers, obviously like constantly breaking down the distinction between like us, the group, and the community that we serve, because a lot of us come from the community, but also, we don't pretend that we are of the community in terms of like most of us are Beirut based and like middle class or whatever. And that like the work is like a lot of us we constantly talk to and like bring in other opinions,
Mm.
but that care work between each other and the holding space for each other. Again, we're living within, I'm not anymore, but within the context of this economic collapse lately, of war. So there's just a lot of emphasis of taking care of each other first and foremost, because without us there's no work. But yeah, also that thing of the conflicts that immediately become, because this has happened, and I'm really glad we've hit this point, because this is that kind of next step from, let's say, your book. And like it's the reading of the book and then doing the work, and then there's so many like
Mm-hmm.
little things that happen that are the big things. And that's part of the reason we're doing this podcast, is to examine those many small things that make up what the work is. And so a lot of the people in our group worked or still do work within the NGO structure. And so the way we've organized our group is against the NGO structure. And so NGO is a bad word. And so it's one of those things where it's like someone would propose something, or we'd be like, do we do this? And it'd be like, it's a bit NGO, isn't it? You know what I mean? And we never really describe what that means, but we all kind of understand that we want to avoid that. When it gets a bit toxic, or difficult rather, is when it becomes about the perception of our group within the community. How are we seen? And it's definitely the fact that most people don't see us as an NGO, because we're not, has radically changed the way that we are met by other people. I've talked about this in the podcast. It's with all the antagonism to the NGOs, again, even amongst just ordinary poor and working class trans people in Lebanon, especially by them, um, we're able to build these kind of like actual bonds of solidarity and trust and care and friendship, because we're just volunteers who see this need and we're doing it. But so then we have hit in those moments where it's like, okay, this thing might be seen as problematic, and what will people say about us? But at the same time, not doing it is also a choice. And people won't see the things we don't do, but we know. And we know by not doing it, we are allowing and enabling this thing to happen, this person to remain homeless or houseless, or this person to not have access to this thing because it'd be unfair, it'd be whatever. Like, this is deep. This is like the actual conversations that, if there isn't a structure for mediating, dissolves the group. And it's a damn shame. It's like and I've seen this in other examples where it's like groups fall out over, I'll say petty bullshit. Like I think they're real. I think there is hurt and people are feeling whatever. I feel like there are tactical and strategic differences, but I don't see that as the conflict. I don't see that as the problem. The problem is that there was no ability to even just hold space for the conflict, to discuss, to care. Like if I care about you, it's not I'll take what you're saying. Care and trust. That I trust that you're here because you're dedicated to the work of liberation. You're not here for social capital. You're not here to win the argument or to be the best anarchist. And so without that, there's that constant suspicion, that constant, you're not as radical as I am, you're a Zionist, or you're a liberal, or you're a charity
And also, can
worker.
we
Like,
move away from like labeling each other that and instead be like, I'd like to influence you.
yes,
I think that there's some liberalism lurking in something you just said, because we all have
Mm-hmm.
liberalism lurking in us. And we all have to keep rooting
yeah,
out anything that Zionism has put inside our minds or other forms
Mm-hmm.
of colonialism. It's like that kind of, but what I think happens, I don't know if you see this too, but like I feel like we're having a strong feeling and we use our politics to justify that. And usually what's happening is there may be some political question happening, like you and I disagree about one of our tactics or the timing or something or some language on the flyer or whatever. But there's also a feeling, Ayman doesn't think I'm smart, or the two of them are really better
Mm-hmm.
friends than I,
mm,
or I have a history of feeling left out because I'm trans and I'm feeling it now, or whatever. And then I'm not aware of the emotional stuff that's driving it, but I'm using the political rationale so hard. And it becomes like I had to leave the group because I'm a Zionist. And it's like, actually, there was like, it's not that there's no political or identity content, but like the emotional piece, that's what just
Yeah.
kills me is like that. And people think it's either or. Like if you say it's got an emotional valence, then you're dismissing my politics. And it's like, no, it's just everything is both. Of course, we're emotional about things that are political. And of course, we use our politics to rationalize our emotional states, especially those of us who our politics is like kind of our biggest mental hook, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Which is beautiful. But it's like we get
mm,
really attached. And it's so painful to watch that. I mean, that just tears apart groups constantly. Of course, I want us to take a stand and be really firm. Like, if you're like trying to make the group not abolitionist and you want to collaborate with the police, fuck yes, let's take a stand. Let's split the group or whatever.
yeah.
But most of the things aren't like that. There's something much more subtle and small that really we didn't need to like break
Yeah.
up over.
Yeah, like a tiny example with that, if someone says like, okay, for this protest and the police, whatever, then it's not this immediate, oh, you are pro cops. It's like, okay, is that coming from a place of fear and insecurity? And like, are you not willing to take the risk? And so, but again, and I think that's perfect, connecting with what you had said, is that some of that logic is a very patriarchal logic, the kind of
Yeah.
dismissiveness
Yeah.
of emotions as like,
Yeah.
oh, that's emotional thinking. It's not
Or that's
rational.
like
It's
an
not
insult. If I
scientific.
were to say, hey, I think there's something emotional going on between us,
Hmm.
that it'd be like I'd be insulting you, like that you're weak for being emotional instead of be strongly rational political.
Right.
It's like, no, actually, everyone is. I mean, we're driven to even join groups by our
Yeah.
emotions, which is good. Our groups should be spaces for emotional growth and emotional
Yeah, I was
satisfaction
gonna
in
say, I was like, it's
relationships.
actually contradictory to a certain point because we're trying to tap
Yep.
into people's emotion to engage them in our political work, but then we tell them, no, 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 keep your emotions out of this. Where it's what is it, right? Do you want us to tap into our whole self that
Mm.
includes our emotions and every part of it? Or
Right.
is it only when it serves you and your needs and what vision you have? Which is, again, aren't we now replicating the same system, but under this illusion that, no, but we're better, we're not them?
Yeah. And how strong would our groups be if we knew that we're all there seeking
Right.
safety, dignity, and belonging? And so that when new people joined, we were like, yes, tell us why you're here. Tell us what you're mad at. Let's feel your dignity. And oh, yeah, would you like to also like, let's all go have drinks or let's all celebrate your birthday or let's all. So we're giving you belonging. And we're also like, oh, wow, no one's visiting you in the hospital. We're going to come. Safety. Like it's okay that we want that from groups. It's also okay that no group can provide
Yeah.
that for us perfectly. So also people get
Mm.
really disappointed. Like, oh my God, I finally found the queer mutual aid group I'm going to have in my community. These people also are anti-Zionists. It's been so hard to find them. And then I like get completely crash as soon
Yeah.
as you guys are imperfect. So how do we be like, yes, it's okay to seek those needs here. Yes, we can design our groups to better offer those things, and that'll actually help with retention and make us all safer and more connected. And when I'm having a reaction because I had you guys on a pedestal and then you
Mm.
turned out to be human and imperfect, Can I know that's happening and not need to take you down for being
Yeah, yeah.
imperfect?
Yeah, I think it really speaks to like the personal work that goes into mutual aid, right? Like that is one of the hidden stuff that's in our revolutions, in our resistance movements, in us holding and trying to create new ways of being, a world where mini world fits. It's how are we engaging with ourselves? What work are we doing internally to move beyond our triggers, our trauma, the things that have destroyed us as people, and then creating a new reality with one another, right? And that is, I mean, in like an ideal society, these spaces where we could show up authentically ourselves is also the spaces that we get to practice the vision that we want to manifest. And so like these mutual aid groups and these spaces in general that allow us to kind of question this stuff becomes that practice, but it also requires us to be doing the work on ourselves, to do a lot of reflection, right? To kind of re-question of like, what just happened here? Yes, there's some politics, but I'm also triggered. What is that trigger coming from? Is it really this person in front of me that's the problem? Or is it some past thing that's now being projected and exponentially blown up because of what's going on? And how do we, again, hold, like you said, hold both the politics and the emotion and our whole being, because we are all very complex beings, right? Like, yeah, and I that's yeah, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, we don't really part of the hidden work, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's the social movements, it's the way we're moving through at a like interpersonal level and like within ourselves and with others, right? And how does that feed our movements and our spaces and actually allow us to manifest what we're dreaming of?
I mean, this is why I had to write a self-help book, because all we have is each other, and we have to do such hard stuff together. We have to do such risky stuff together. Like, I mean, especially now, it's like people I know, are really, it's like we have to how are we going to get people abortion drugs? How are we going to get people trans medicine? How are we going to hide people from the police and ICE? How are we going to, these are not new things we've always needed. How are we going to share our homes with each other when people can't even stand to like have roommates because they're like so mad at each other about the dishes? Like, the human the ability to take risks together, to be able to like lay down on the, on the tracks and block the coal trains, or, physically block the pipelines with our bodies. Like the kinds of things people need to do, dig each other out of the rubble, like, and survive. Like the kinds of things we have to do together are so intense. And they completely rely on relationships. There's no stand-in. You can't build that kind of trust. You can't and so when people think it's all about like getting the food out, getting them, getting like finishing the project or getting really good things on social media, it's like, no, it's all about how did you feel about each other? Did you have the energy to come back the next day and do it again? Did you think you could trust this person if you guys get arrested together? Or did you think you could trust this person to do something illegal with you and not get caught? Like this is really the relational stuff in it, because of, I think, really a sexist society that says like relationships are women's work and emotions are for women, and like getting things done in the outer world is all that matters. Like that's really robbed us of like that care about relationship. And for me, a lot of that analysis has come through like women of color feminisms. Like that's where people have really named like, and also disability justice genealogies. Like, people are really naming that the relational and the care work is the thing that makes the world go round. And that's always backburnered for like in a capitalist society that wants extraction fast. It's like, who cares how many people get injured as long as we get this work done? Who cares if people hate each other, if some people are exploited? That's, that thinking lives in us all. And it really infects when we try to do mutual aid work together. And it definitely is in the nonprofit, the NGO. It's like very much like, hiring and firing people and exploiting them and getting them to do as much work as fast as possible. And, so that certain people can have middle-class lifestyles, it's just gross. And it's a lot of work to be like, oh, wow, how we treated each other is actually what mattered here. It's very hard.
And how we're already, like, even if we're not conscious of it, treating each other, and acknowledging the fact that, like, I'm not exploiting anybody on my day-to-day basis, but in actuality, I am, by living in the imperial center, by understanding how global capitalism works, how these borders and the nation-state system works. Just, that those are connected. Like, I'm not immediately doing it, but I am benefiting, and part of my illusion of safety, illusion of whatever, Um,
Hmm.
A is very temporary, especially now thinking of like the climate crisis, but also thinking of like whatever. But yeah, I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
illusions of systems that need to be dismantled. That like exactly that I can just give to an organization and that's just my part. Or that I don't have to deal with the, because I say this a lot, and I say this with all my like my loving heart for people, but people are
Yeah.
messy and shitty and petty and
Yeah.
like
Desperate, lonely, like wounded. Yeah.
yeah,
Like, yeah. Revenge, full of revenge.
it's difficult and it's yeah. And I mean, we know this very well with the queer community. Like, so it's like, I remember one person in the group, a new person recommended like, "Hey, why don't we do like a speed dating for queers in Lebanon?" I was like, "No, no, 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 no." I love the impetus, I love the idea, but holy shit, is that a recipe for disaster? And we are not prepared at all to do like the mass mediating work of like
What were you worried would happen if you guys did speed dating? I'm curious. Like, what was your concern? What were you worried would?
just. I mean, it's a pretty small community, but it's also, I mean, the drama. Um, and then I don't know, just the drama. And I just know that like I don't know, it's difficult. And there is
Mm.
a lot of like internal, I'll just call it beef. Um, and so again, I love the idea. And I we do stuff where it's like social, and I mean a big part of our work is like constant communication and relationship building and like connecting people within the community and whatever. But we had the same fear with
Mm.
like opening up a community WhatsApp channel where it's like, okay, we will have to do the work of being the moderator and the mediators because if conflict happens, then, but then at the same time, we want to make it autonomous, but also we would still be responsible because we put it together.
It opens up the question of how to then transform again the way we hold relationships with each other, and do we have the structures in place to actually be able to do these things? And if we don't, how do we build these structures in a collectivized way where we're not, it's not being gatekeeped by a few of us who thinks that this is how it should be done, right? um
Yeah. This is what's so hard.
yeah, yeah,
This is part of also why I wrote this book is because the new one is because I'm like, can we have, can we try to build conversations in our communities about how the romance myth, jealousy, other kind of
mm,
classic things that produce a lot of the drama you're describing operate in our communities? Can we build some shared analysis about it instead of everybody just wandering around blaming each other for it, thinking they're the worst or they're the only one who's doing it or someone
hmm,
else is the worst? Like, how do we create new norms about how we want to treat each other, given the very strong feelings that sex, romance, and dating bring up, and how that often destroys community spaces or leads people to exploit each other, hurt each other? Like, what's
yeah,
the, how can we like have any kind of shared language around that? Right now, it
yeah,
literally is people like when that's happening to them, they think it's just them or that it's just the
yeah,
person who hurt them and that they're on a
yeah,
campaign against that person. A lot of people I've talked to have had conversations about like, should our group have a rule that you can't date in our group?
yeah,
Or should it have a rule that if you're dating someone in the group, you have to tell everybody? People are
yeah,
like, maybe because people they feel like it wasn't transparent that you two were on the same side in that debate, and I didn't know you were fucking and whatever. And my strong belief about this as like a harm reductionist and someone who's sex positive, I do not think you should ban dating. I don't think you should require people to tell, because what those things do is they cause people to hide their sexual activity, which increases the dangers associated with it. And so
hmm,
like if you and I just started hooking up and we have to tell the group, that is just like gonna, of course we're gonna be
Yeah.
like, I don't know, I don't really know what we're doing yet. So then we're not gonna, now we have a secret against the group that could become really weird for us, or one of us could feel like threatened by that, like, oh my
hmm,
God, like that person now, my lover can tell everybody that I was lying. Like it can just produce so many, these sexual and romantic relationships are the most dangerous relationships in our society, right? They are the ones
hmm,
that produce the most violence for most people, right? 30% of people produces violence in their relationship, gay or straight. And so like, how do we create an environment in our groups where there's no shame around sexuality
yeah,
and where we are like, oh, there is ethical and unethical ways to be sexual, and we're going to all have some shared tools around that. Like
right,
we actually want this to come to the surface. So it's not like you're in a relationship where something bad's happening and you can't tell anybody. That's how
yeah,
most of it is now. And
yeah,
so for me, my hope is that this book will give people some shared language so that they can have conversations with each other like people can read part of it in the group or look at one of the charts together in the group, just like people do with mutual aid, and be like, oh, well, how's this work? What are my experiences like with that been like? And what are yours? And what have your breakups been like? And how would we like to treat each other when we break up? Even having that conversation in our community groups or with our
Yeah.
friends, instead of just being like, I hope I hope I never break up again. It's like, it's gonna happen, you know?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true.
Oh, I'm glad to. I accidentally, or unintentionally gave you a perfect segue to talk about the new
Yeah,
book.
no, I think I mean, I don't know about y'all, but being in spaces where we're truly coming together in mutual aid and working towards liberation, that's a total turn on with me, for me, right? My sexual energy is like alive and well, and I just like,
Cool.
fuck yeah, right? Like, and that to me is part of moving towards liberation, is being able to name this stuff and be like, yeah, we met and I like working with you and also I'm attracted to you. How do we talk about this? How do we engage in this in a way
Yeah.
that like opens us up more and moves us closer to the vision, knowing that this is a new practice. This is another way of practicing the world that we want to create.
And the answer is not that you would never come on to someone. The answer is that you would come on to someone if you want to. And if they said no, you would accept no. And
Right,
that is
right.
what is missing. People are like, maybe if no one ever comes on to anyone, no one will ever be harassed or assaulted. And it's like, that is not the way to that. The way to it is to learn how to accept no from people and also how to say no, that person would feel like they could say no, even though, wow, well, you're the founder of the group and I don't know, people think you're cool. Do I have to do, it's like, no, everyone's allowed to say no to sex and
Yep.
everyone's allowed to ask for it,
Yep. Yep. It's part of life. Like all these many ways of caring for each other. This is another way of caring, right?
And your sexual needs are legitimate social needs. Like it's
Absolutely.
okay that people need sex. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely.
I mean, as a really cute example, I remember during the revolution in Lebanon in 2019, revolution in Arabic means thawra, and there was like quite literally like a whole thing about thawra crushes, like that person you saw at the protest throwing a rock at
They
a cop,
throw
and you're
that
like,
rock so
holy
good.
shit,
Yeah.
she's gorgeous. Yeah, yeah, throw the rock at me, girl. Like, come on, like,
Yeah.
I love that.
because it's like
Yeah.
such a sexually potent, and I mean, we're out there and we're so strong and we're so powerful and we're screaming and we're fighting back and we're
We're in our power.
Yeah. Don't meet your lover at work or at school where you just
No.
might have
Yeah.
like some really annoying people with bad politics. Like meet your lover in the revolution. They're more likely to be
Right.
like a right-on
yeah.
person who I want you to date.
Yep. Yep.
Actually, and one of my closest friends, she's a journalist. She met her, who is now her husband, who is now going to be like the father of her child, in a protest. He basically like whisked her away from tear gas on his motorcycle, and it's like a Romeo and Juliet situation because she's
I
like,
would watch that movie.
yeah, 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 and she's like Syrian
Yeah.
Jordanian, but
Right.
like
I'd like to see that
And
movie. Yeah.
it's a movie. I remember the Facebook post where I was like the tear gas, the whatever, and I was like searching for my friends, and I saw like her being like, "I'm fine, don't worry." This guy like took me on his motorcycle, and beautiful. I don't know, just like a lovely, like great. Um, and then yeah, when she was messaging me like, "I think I have a crush on him," I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, he kind of
literally.
like this is a
Yeah.
story."
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the relationship work, right? Like, and like you said, Dean, this is like the most dangerous because I mean, we're really taught within this system, monogamy and patriarchy of like, this is the only right way of doing relationships, right? These expectations, this way of being, and breaking that is really like, as a queer person myself, and starting to really question my gender identity, my sexuality, finally like opened me up in ways like it was right. My sexuality is like this thing that was brewing, and I justified as like, oh, but all female-bodied people are gorgeous. Everyone feels this way, right? Like you justify it within the context that you understand. Being able to break that, like as I continue to try to break that more, it opens up to these like being okay with the unknown of like, oh, what possibilities can there be, right? What happens if I'm not restricted by these expectations or these ideas or whatever it is, rules really of how I should be engaging with the world, and what does that allow me to do? And also, as someone who's experienced a lot of sexual trauma in my life, moving through the trauma and being able to have these conversations with someone I'm interested in and being like and consent and trying to reclaim has been incredibly empowering, right? To like remember that I have a voice and I could speak up for myself and I could not only ask for what I want, but I could put a stop.
Yeah.
Those are the practices against this larger system to be able to be like, oh, I'm watching something happen to them, and being able to now step in and support them rather than just be a bystander watching, right? So like these moments in my personal life that then expands out to allow me to be a stronger person, to stand up and engage in the theories of liberation that I really want to be part of.
Mm,
Um, yeah,
that's
so it's
beautiful.
like it's very open, yeah, powerful space.
Yeah, and our
Yeah.
interpersonal liberation is totally tied up. People join movements and then they're like, oh my God, I can dress like this. I can deal with this
Mm,
internalized racism that's in my mind, this internalized sexism. I can find other freaks who think this is beautiful, this thing that our society has told me is not beautiful about me. Like the personal liberation is a wonderful reason to be there. And it's a natural,
yeah.
I think, side effect of the broader liberation framework. And there's just so many beautiful stories about that in all of our movements, people taking back their bodies and their own sexual practices and having this erotic desire that's tied up with imagining a different world. I love your
Mm,
description of that. It's very beautiful. And also
mhm.
recovering from what the world has already done to us and the way it's
Yeah.
narrowed our ideas about who we can be, what we can say yes and no to, like the very basics of our dignity and autonomy.
That's true.
I mean, on my end, I think polyamory was like a big way into my segue into mutual aid
Yeah.
and like involvement in the queer community in Lebanon because I'd been in a long-term relationship, I still am. At the time was like long distance, but there was a lot of deconstruction
Mm,
of like, wait, why monogamy? Like, am I afraid? Like it starts with a very like moral
mm,
thing, and then you would just deconstruct it as like, wait, no, this is more about trust. This is more about also possession and ownership. This person is mine, and if someone else were to have him, then I might lose him. But it's like, no, I never had him to begin with. There is not that ownership, and that ownership comes from a very patriarchal idea of literal like marriage as a form of property or like whatever.
hmm
But then it's also, yeah, it enables you to experience and explore people and communities in a way that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. I, I mean, this has gone in a very interesting direction, but basically, I opened up or like was experimenting with my partner, opening up because I had been living in Beirut. I'd been back, and it was like I want to engage with people in a multitude
Mhm.
of
mm,
ways, and one of them is sexually. And without that, there's like a limitation of how far I can get to know people, how I can like get to know, you know. But so there is that deconstruction of my own, and through that also deconstruction of gender, deconstruction of like my role in society.
hmm
What things are things that I actually believe in? Um, I mean, I think I've spent a lot of time deconstructing my gender, and then I find I'm like actually fine being a cis male, or I mean queer, but regardless. So it's not that like that experimentation will always lead you to a completely far away place,
Yeah.
but at least I now know what is me, or at least I can estimate what is me and what is the societal thing. And as a feminist, as someone against patriarchy, I would want to constantly do the work internally of what is that kind of influence, because we are all influenced so
Mm,
heavily by white supremacy, by patriarchy, by capitalism, like by imperialism. Um, and it's like ridiculous when people immediately claim, no, 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 I'm not racist. It's like, yeah, like, have you done the thinking? Because it's you probably are a bit. It's fine. It doesn't mean you're a
Mhm.
bad person. It just means that there's
Yeah,
work to be
like
done.
hmm
lifelong, we are all just made of all the systems that are shaping us and family
hmm
systems, cultural systems, all these norms, like, and just being more like loving and accepting towards ourselves. I was like, oh, I've just run into something I don't like. That's not me. That's not mine. I'm allowed
Yeah.
to unchoose that and to acknowledge, oh, it just came up again. Like, people have so much internalized capitalism, and you see this in mutual aid groups. People are so harsh with themselves. We need to get more done, or I'm lazy, I'm bad. People's internal
hmm
narratives are about coercive work systems. And then they do it to each other too,
hmm
rushing each other and, having these like weird productivity norms that are not like caring, wonderful ones based on reducing suffering, but have this other stuff in it about more moralism of work.
Yeah.
That's a lifelong
Yeah.
struggle to get that stuff out of our minds. And
Yeah.
just being like, oh, there it is again. And just, that I didn't invent that. And I'm working with that in my psyche. And I can reject it, and I can also be like, it's okay that it keeps cropping up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because even the work we're doing and the whole principle of anarchism, it's not that we're trying to create a utopia, it's that we're working with what we have
Yes.
right now to just do what we can.
Hmm.
And so in that way, it's that kind of connection of means and
Mhm.
ends.
Like finding little cracks and slivers for
Yeah.
liberation
Yeah.
anywhere we can,
Yeah.
instead of being like, I need the whole thing right now and I need to become a totally different person who wasn't raised in this society. It's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen in one moment, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we've been at it for about an hour and 15 minutes, I think. Um, I have a list of other questions and things this conversation has like brewed. Um, but I think this is a good stopping point right now.
Great. Maybe we'll talk again sometime. I'm very glad to meet both of you and just like hear more about what you're doing. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to have you on again and dig more deeper into the nitty-gritty stuff, the structures and the relationships. Yeah, it's been really wonderful, Dean.
I'm excited. I'm so excited about your podcast and all the other work you both do. I hope to just become more connected to everything you're doing.
Same here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dean. This is a pleasure. So, thank you very much for listening to another episode of the Mutual Aid Podcast. If you like this conversation, please consider supporting us by heading on over to patreon.com/fromtheperiphery and become a member. You help support the work. You also get access to exclusive content, such as my sub-series Keep This Between Us, and an invitation to our monthly hangout. And I think that's it for us. Also, like and subscribe, leave a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast, and most importantly, tell your friends, tell your family.
And check out Dean's book and his previous books, and which we'll have plugged in our little info.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much, Dean.
So glad to be here.